Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome to lecture 3. We'll be talking here about, we are starting a new topic, which is called fundamentals of fruit production. And we'll start off with the environmental requirements for fruit production in this lecture. And we will go through different environmental requirements, mainly the climate and the soil. And that includes the details about the soil requirements, and then we'll talk about the climatic requirements, which is the most important, including temperature, sunlight, rainfall, and humidity. So we'll cover all what that is related to temperature mainly, because that's the most important category in fruit production. Okay, so let's get started with the climate and soil. When you plan for growing fruit trees, you are planning for a long time. That means more than 10 years. Compared to vegetables or field crops or any other crop that will be there for only a short time. And therefore, it is very important to decide what kind of climate and soil that you have, and that will be suitable for which kind of fruit tree. So these are the factors that are very important in deciding or in consideration of going for fruit production. The first one is climatic factors. And these factors include temperature, which is the most important by far. And then also other important climate factors include light, rainfall, and humidity, as well as wind and other climatic factors. But the temperature is about the most important one. There is also geographic factors or soil factors. Geographic means soil also. That also include land topography, how the land is level, what the soil is made of, what kind of texture you have, and all these issues. There's also ecological and economic factors that includes pests and diseases, salinity, water, and all these other issues, as well as some economic factors like finance, labor, and market. And we'll get to talk about each of these factors. First of all, let's start with the soil. The soil conditions in general, of course, there are specific conditions in terms of fertility and soil type for each fruit tree. But in general, this is in general, the tree requires deep, well-drained, loamy soils. That means the soil needs to be deep because the tree, like mango, is not like tomato. The root system is very deep, so the soil has to be also very deep. It needs to be well drained. That means the water will need to be out of the soil. It cannot be always wet or always in water because, soils or trees don't like too much water all the time because they're sitting there for a long time. As well as a loamy soil, which is made up of silt, sand, and clay. The pH needs to be between 6 and 7, otherwise some of the nutrients will not be available if it is above or below this value. Also, you have to consider what kind of salinity you have because each crop has different salinity tolerance level. Okay, so here is what you see in terms of different kinds of soils, and we are located in this area. And if you look at this area, either we have already soils or empty soils. Both of these have, alkaline soil, which is more than 6 pH, as well as a lot of sand, and the kind of soil here is very poor. That means it requires a lot of fertilizer. So you need to really plan very well for this when you plan for fruit trees. In terms of climate, you can see here we're in a country that is classified as desert. Okay, only a little part of the country is not desert, but most of it is actually desert, and it is considered semi-arid or arid. That means it has arid climate. So we are in BW here, which is arid. Only when in the south, when we have a little bit of monsoon, that is a little bit BS or semi-arid, but most of Oman is actually arid, which means the soil is very dry, the climate is very dry, and we need irrigation. So there you go. We have soils that requires also, it's very poor, require a lot of fertilizers, and you have a land or climate that requires a lot of irrigation. And therefore, it is two things to consider when you plan for fruit trees: salinity and water. Okay. Now, the worst part is there is a climate change going on. And so temperature anomalies are there, and we are also expected to see more of the high temperature. So it's not going to go higher, it's going to go like this. One of these three temperatures where we are going to have more extreme weather, like hail, for example. Here, this is hail, barad, or like snow, like in case of Nizwa. And all of this is very destructive to fruit trees. Remember, when you plant fruit trees, you plant them for a long time. So when there's a storm coming and destroy all your crop, it is really a big problem and a big loss for the farmers. And therefore, climate change adaptation and mitigation here is very, very important. Okay, so why temperature is important? Because all the calculations are actually based on temperature, how tolerant the trees adapted to the certain climate is based on actually temperature requirements. For example, coldhardiness, how much tolerance to minimum temperature that is killing 50% of the plant. That is the definition of coldhardiness. When we say the plant or the tree is cold hardy, that means it's going to be killed if the temperature goes below certain temperature. That will kill 50% of the plants. So if it can't tolerate that minimum temperature, then it is cold hardy plant. But if it will going to be dying because of cold temperature, it is not cold hardy. And even within the tree itself, different parts also have different tolerance to freezing temperature. For example, it's very easy for flower bud to fall, and you can see that any rise in temperature, any cold temperature will always lead to the drop of flower bud. But the wood of the tree usually is not affected by cold temperature or hot temperature. Okay, so most of the fruit trees are actually, if they are in temperate origin, and you know already what temperate is, if it is from temperate climate, then usually they are cold hardy. But if you are in subtropics, it can tolerate a temperature of 5 to minus 10 Celsius. This is if it is subtropics. But like pomegranate, for example, in Jabal Akhtar. But if it is tropical fruit crop, it cannot tolerate frost. It cannot tolerate temperature below zero for a long period of time. So it is very important to decide what kind of fruit tree and where you're going to plant it. There is also something called chilling requirements, which is very important concept for temperate fruit crops especially. This is not very important for tropical crops, but for temperate crops is extremely important. But it is actually, there's no chilling requirement for tropical, although they are affected actually. If you look at the mango, of course they will flower more if we have colder temperature. But that is not really similar to the temperate crops affected by chilling, by low temperature. So chilling requirement for fruit trees is actually the number of hours below 7 degrees Celsius. And this is required for what? Required to break the dormancy. You know, in certain countries, even in Jabal Akhdar, the trees go dormant. They go dormant. That means they leave they drop their leaves during the winter time or in the fall, and they stay without dormant. That means they stay without leaves throughout the winter time. Now next spring they will have to produce new flowers and new leaves. For that to happen, especially the flowering, you need a certain number of chilling requirements or chilling hours. How do you calculate that? You calculate it by calculating how many hours below 7 degrees Celsius. If you know how many hours, then you will know if that crop is going to be fruiting or producing flowers. Many of the temperate woody plants like apples, like pear and others, usually they require 500 to 1000 chilling hours every winter. Okay, for bud break in Jabal Akhdar requiring about 200 to 400, and that's why those fruit trees in Jabal Akhdar are actually having something called low chilling requirement. So they don't need as much cold weather below 7 degrees Celsius as compared to the ones in, for example, in New York. If we had a warm winter, then we will have poor growth and poor fruit set. When it is also too cold, the bud break will be sooner, and that will lead to frost damage. So it needs to be enough. It cannot like that's why it's 500 to 1500, because if it exceeded 1500, that means it was way too cold, and that will kill the flower buds. If it is less than 500, like it's going to be less than 500, that means we are having a problem because we are not going to have any flowering. So it needs to be somewhere in the middle, depending on the cultivar. There are cultivars that are called low chill cultivars. Those are include Florida Prince, peach or Florida Home, pear, and a variety of other fruit trees, cultivars that can be grown in Oman and Jabal Akhdar, and they produce a good yield. Okay, so that's one definition called chilling requirements. There is a formula that you can calculate the number of hours that fall below 7 degrees Celsius. Now there's another term. This is called growing degree hours. And that's basically the number of hours when they become above 4.5. Remember, there was chilling requirement is 7 degrees Celsius. Anything that goes below 7 degrees is calculated. Here we do above, not below, it's above, to resume growth of temperate crops, and the plant receive these also during dormancy. And once you have like already satisfied the required chilling units, the ones that are below 7 degrees, then you start growing, right? For you to grow, or for the tree to grow, it needs growing degree hours, which is a temperature above 4.5 degrees Celsius. Okay, so you have to tell the difference between chilling requirement and growing degree hours. Another definition related to temperature and fruit trees is something called growing season length. Okay, and that will be somewhere between bloom and harvest, not between, you know, the beginning of the season or the end of it. It is between bloom, when the trees start to produce flowers, until harvest. And this season length depends on the cultivar and the tree itself. It can go from 30 to 200 days. And you know that cultivars in date palm, for example, Nagal, it starts early. So if the bloom is February, you start already in harvesting in May. So that means you have how many days? You have like February, March, April, and May. That is about 120 days, 120 days for Nagal. But if you look at Khasab, it's in October. So you add again another 120 days. So that's going to be like for more than 3 or 200 days before you start harvesting other cultivars, late cultivars. And that's why growing season is very important definition. Another term related to fruit harvesting is heat units or thermal constant, and that is the time to harvest in temperature units. So you calculate the temperature units or temperature degrees, and then you decide when you do harvest, because this is very important for certain kind of crops. For example, like fig, like citrus, like others. You cannot tell by the look of the fruit, so you have to calculate it somehow to know exactly when you harvest. And one of the ways to do this is calculating the heat units. Heat unit or thermal constant are usually known for certain kinds of crops. For example, above 6,000 for dry dates, banana, mango, tropical fruits, and subtropical fruits. But for other cold climate crops like apple, peach, grapes, they require less heat units. Of course, these are, you know, deciduous fruit crops that grow in colder climates, and therefore they require less heat to be harvested, whereas dry weather or dry climate or tropics require more temperature to be harvested. So that's why fruit harvesting in terms of heat units is also very important. So heat unit and thermal constant are the same. Okay, so these are some of the ways to harvest, to determine when to harvest. Heat unit is one way to do it, but there are also other ways, including the number of days after fruit set, like banana, grapes, and others. The shape of the fruit, like banana, you could tell, also carambola or star fruit. Firmness, how hard the fruit is, especially things like apple, and you have also machines that can determine this. Change of color, like citrus, mango, papaya, pineapple, you will know by change of color that it is time to harvest the fruit. You can also look at the acid to sweetness ratio, acid to sugar or acid to Brix ratio, and that can be extracted for juice crops like citrus, pineapple, grapes, and you will tell if it is too sweet, it's time to harvest. If it is too acidic, not yet, not ready yet for harvesting. There's also minimum juice volume, and especially in citrus like lime, because if you harvest lime when it is too young, you start to squeeze it to get the juice, you cannot get the juice. But if you wait until it is ready, you squeeze the lime and you will get the lime juice. Okay, so temperature affects all aspects of fruit cultivation, including cultivar selection, the yield for that year, the quality of the fruit, and the management practices. So it's very important consideration for temperature. Temperature also affects fruit quality, especially color, TSS, and flavor of the fruit. Usually, warm temperature during ripening, if like the temperature is warm during the time when the fruit is ripening, then that means more sugar will be accumulated and less acid, because acid will degrade. So the taste of the fruit becomes sweet. If the temperature stay cool, the fruit becomes watery and tart. That means it's like a little bit acidic, but it's not really acidic. Anyway, it is not really sweet. This is very important for grape juice. And they divide this into vintage years and poor years. Vintage years are good years for grape juice because the temperature is really good. And poor years, of course, when the temperature is really bad. If you think about it, late summer, early fall is cool, then you have acidic taste because the climate is really not hot. When it is warm and hot, then you have sweet taste. So always the taste of the juice or the quality of the juice always affected by temperature. That's why temperature is very important for us. There's a way to calculate the metabolic processes in fruit trees, something called Q10, which is basically the rate of enzymatic reactions double every 10 degrees Celsius increase in temperature. So if you have 10 to 20, then the rate of enzymatic reaction is going to double. From 2030 is going to double the rate of enzymatic reaction, and that's why it's called Q10. Q10 means temperature 10 increases or doubles the rate of enzymatic reactions. This is very important in physiological processes such as respiration, photosynthesis, growth, fruiting of the plant. However, if you have too much heat above 40, for example, or above 30, this is not going to hold true. The enzymatic reactions will actually degrade and stop because there will be damage to the vegetative and reproductive growth of the plant, such as desiccation if it is too hot and freezing if it is too cold. So high temperature leads to high transpiration, stomata will be closed, and lower photosynthesis. Chilling injury happens because of the damage to proteins at low temperature, like mango, papaya, especially for tropical fruits like these ones. Another damage caused by temperature is something called freezing damage. And that's basically two types. One is mechanical damage, when there is, of course, every plant is mostly water. More than 90% of the plant is water. So imagine you freeze this plant or the leaves or others, what will happen? There will be a damage. That damage can be mechanical. That means there is crystal formation inside the protoplast of the cell. Okay? So that's one thing that happens. See the crystal formation here? Okay, and that will damage, of course, the cell. Crystal formation will always be destroying the cells. Or there's a physical damage. That means drought-like conditions inside and outside the plant. So that this means, the water in the soil will freeze. So the plant cannot absorb the water, and it creates a climate or a condition like drought, like there's no water, because the water is not available anyways, it is frozen. So there's mechanical damage and there is a physical damage. Now, based on the climatic requirements and the effect of climate and effect of temperature on fruit crops, the fruits themselves are classified into two groups. One is called climacteric, and the second one is called non-climacteric fruit. So we have climatic fruit and non-climatic fruit. What's the difference? When you have climatic fruit, there's a sharp increase in what? In respiration rate of the fruit, reaching a peak, signaling the start of senescence. That means the plant already have achieved ripening and it is going toward senescence. And that changes the fruit itself. And these fruit crops or fruits that change with time after they are harvested or after ripening include avocado, banana, pear, apple, peach, mango, fig, papaya. All these are climacteric. Okay, so they follow respiration peak, is called climatic point, and after that irreversible degradation happens. After the climatic peak, respiration rate is steadily declining till cell reach senescence and death. So these are climatic fruits. With climatic fruit, there is an increase in respiration, and there are changes in ethylene and also in respiration. After the fruit is harvested, you can see a change of color. For example, the banana, you take the banana green and then it becomes red, then it becomes dotted with black. Same thing for mango, peach, apples, and so on. These are all climatic fruit. Non-climatic fruit, these fruits, number two, the respiration rate does not increase like these ones. It does not. Here, a sharp increase, but here, no increase. The rate decreases slowly, steadily, and there is no climatic peak, and that includes citrus, grapes, pineapple, olives, and cherry. If you harvest any of these non-climatic, they stay the same. Actually, you don't see change. So tomorrow, if you buy lime or you buy oranges, for example, and you keep them at home, they will stay the same. But if you buy mango or banana, it's not going to stay the same. It's going to change. Okay, it looks the same, it looks different here for mango and banana, whereas citrus is the same. So ripening, actually, the way the fruits ripening pattern vary among fruits, okay, and that's why respiration is very important. Increased respiration will lead to spoilage of the fruit. So very important to understand the difference between climatic and non-climatic, and therefore I will show you now what's the difference between these two. You can see here fruit growth. So fruit growth, after they reach the peak, they start to grow, respiration rate start to slow down until ripening. After that, there is a sharp increase in respiration, and this is always characteristic of climatic fruit. There's an increase in respiration rate at the end, and after that, senescence will happen. And you can see it here also, respiration rate is going down until close to ripening, and at the ripening stage you will have increase in respiration rate, and this is called climatic peak. This is CP, climatic peak here, and then after that there's a degradation. These are the climacteric fruits. But if you have non-climatic, like oranges, what will happen? It is just a slow decline of respiration rate, unlike this when there is no peak. In the non-climatic, there is no peak and there is no rapid degradation of the fruit. So that's about temperature. Please go back and read it again, make sure you understand it, and understand the role of temperature in the physiology of the plant, especially in the concentration of juices, in the quality of juice, the pH, the total soluble solids, the acidity, and so on, and also understand the chilling requirements and the heat units required for fruit trees, as well as at the end the difference between climatic and non-climatic fruits. Now let's move on to sunlight. Sunlight is very important because it affects photosynthesis. As you know, photosynthesis is very important for tree growth and for the production of sugars in the tree, and therefore sunlight is the main mechanism by which this process happens as energy. But not only photosynthesis, light is also very important for flower bud formation and for flowering of trees. It's also important in the pigmentation of the fruit skin. Like apple, for example, they will not develop red apple or any other color of apple unless there is enough light. So in general, all crops need sunlight. Some of the crops, they need shade. They don't like direct sunlight like coffee or cacao. They don't like direct sunlight, but they rather have shade. They prefer shade, of course. But these are special crops like this cacao here in the shade, and also here we have coffee in the forest, and these don't like direct sunlight, but sunlight in general is very important for photosynthesis, flowering, and pigmentation. You can see the effect of light here. This area is covered, okay, and this area no, it has light, and you can actually cover the light, not allow it in, and you can make all kinds of shapes on the fruit here. A third important factor is rainfall and humidity, and this usually affects diseases and pests and so on. It doesn't really directly affect the physiology of the plant except for irrigation. Basically, if you have plenty of rain, you don't need irrigation. If you don't have enough rain, you need irrigation. But in general, most of the tropical fruits are actually rainy climates. They grow in arid climates. If you grow the same fruits in arid area like Oman, you need to provide irrigation, because in their place, like mango, they don't require irrigation, but here they need irrigation. High relative humidity and rain will lead to, of course, increased weeds, pests, disease. For example, a variety of fungal diseases always increase with the increase in humidity. So that is basically it. This is an overview of the role of the environment in fruit production, especially highlighted the soils, the climate, the sunlight, temperature, for example, and sunlight, rainfall, and humidity. We were talking about in temperature coldhardiness, which is like what's the temperature that kills 50% of the plants. If it is exceeded, then the plant is cold hardy. Chilling requirements is the degrees that are below 7 degrees Celsius. And then this is very important for bud break, whether it is vegetative or flowering. There is a growing degree days that are required 4.5 or above after it has achieved the chilling requirements. You know the growing season from bloom to harvest. You know the heat units required for harvesting, and these heat units required for harvesting depending on the cultivar and the origin of the tree. If it is from tropical climates, there will be more, or hot climates, there will be more. If it is temperate crops, there will be less. There is also a physiological effect of temperature, especially important on the quality and taste of the fruit, as well as photosynthesis and all the other factors. You also knew and you learned about Q10, which means the rate of metabolic processes, metabolic reactions inside of the plant, inside of the cell, doubles every 10 degrees Celsius until you reach a point where there is damage by increase in temperature. This is not infinity, but for example, between 10 to 20, between 20 to 30, the rate of enzymatic reaction always doubles every 10 degrees Celsius. That's why we call it Q10. Remember, there is a freeze damage or a damage caused by cold or freezing temperature, which is below 0 degrees Celsius, and because of the plant is made primarily of water, there is a physical damage and there is physiological damage, because basically the water inside the cell becomes ice, and when you have ice, then that will rupture the cell. Similar to the way you put water in a plastic bottle and you put in the freezer, they will break. The same thing happens to the cell. Other physical damage includes the water is frozen in the soil, so the plant cannot absorb it, and that creates a drought-like conditions. There is also climatic and non-climatic fruits, and this depends on the respiration rate and ethylene production and the changes in the fruit. If that happens, then that is climatic fruit, and there are many examples like banana, for example. And there are other fruits that don't show that, and that includes grapes. If you buy grapes, it doesn't change. If you buy oranges, it doesn't change. Whereas if you buy banana, which is climacteric, it will change. If you buy it green, it's going to be red, yellow, and after that it's going to be dark. Same thing happened to mango, same thing happened to apples, and so on. So that's about temperature. About sunlight, the importance of light in photosynthesis is very important because that's the source of energy for the plant to do photosynthesis. But light is also very important in flowering, in color development, in other issues. Same thing, rainfall is important for especially for tropical fruits. But if you don't have rainfall, you need to provide irrigation. Humidity is mainly important in causing problems, like for example, causing fungi, diseases, and pests, and all kinds of issues to deal with when you have high humidity. But you need to consider all these factors. Before you start growing any crop, you understand the importance of the soil, the light, the humidity, and so on. So these are extremely important and very important to understand and to learn. You go back and get the climatic data about temperature, about light, humidity, and rainfall, and therefore you understand the importance of all these factors before you do anything. Before you decide on anything, go back, check the location, because the location of the farm is the most important thing in fruit production. Okay, so this is the last slide, and if you have any questions, please let me know. I wish you good luck, and we'll see you next time. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.